Welcome back to the Grease Goblins Rereads channel. Today's video, we're going to be talking about Tyrion XI, A Clash of Kings. We're getting deeper into the book, and now we're really going to take a step into the King's Landing plot specifically. And I've kind of been talking about this really throughout all of the rest of the other POVs, because we're kind of getting down to where a lot of POVs have one last chapter left. That's not the case for the Tyrion plotline. He still has a number of POVs after this, including the Battle of the Blackwater. We have a Davos chapter in the Battle of the Blackwater, and a number of Sansa chapters to finish out the book. So coming off of the House of the Undying chapter, one of the best of the series and of this book, George kind of fits in, I would say, not exactly a filler chapter, but Tyrion XI is a lot about the build-up to the Battle of the Blackwater. You have things like the Mountain Clan men being sent out to harass Stannis on his approach to King's Landing. We have, for instance, the gates, the beaches being prepared for the battle, kind of burning away all these little fish like markets or whatever, so that Stannis can't easily get onto the walls without even really having to have ladders. All of that is like preparation stuff for Tyrion. We see the wildfire and the counts that Tyrion will have at this point. So this chapter really is about building all of the pieces for the Battle of the Blackwater, reminding you of some of the stuff that maybe he was focused on earlier on in the book. Like, for instance, the wildfire stuff with the pyromancers was something that was early on established in the first couple Tyrion chapters. We haven't heard much from it, from that point. So George really needed to fit in a chapter where we kind of reintroduce all of that kind of stuff and paint what is going to happen with the Battle of the Blackwater. As we get into page 533, Tyrion threatened Shagga that if he died stupidly, he would feed his body to the goats, as Shagga laughed, saying Tyrion had no goats. Really just implying, like, the city is starving, and Tyrion is going to send out the mountain men to go ahead and try and do some sort of distraction. They're of more use trying to harass Stannis' forces than trying to be a disciplined group of men inside the castle walls. Tyrion replied he would get some just for him as dawn broke as the storm crows pushed off from the quay. Timett and the Burn men had gone to the King's Wood 2 days earlier. The Blackears and Moon Brothers followed yesterday, and now the Stone Crows departed. It's for Tyrion a sombering feeling, because these are men that fought for him at the Battle of the Green Fork. They've been with him for a long amount of time now. They've felt kind of like a security blanket, where Tyrion has a very loyal force in the Mountain Clansmen, where someone like Cersei doesn't. Like, Cersei believes she has maybe the gold cloaks, but she really doesn't. And for Tyrion, it's going into the same problem that Ned had. Can you trust, for instance, the gold cloaks? Can you trust these people around you to back you if there was a confrontation? And you're really focused more specifically now on the conflict with Stannis. Can these men hold up? You may have a good amount of men, but if the battle's going badly, how's that going to work for Tyrion? Tyrion instructed them to not fight battles, but to raid camps, ambush scouts, hang bodies as warnings, and attack at night to keep enemies fearful. We're doing a kind of a guerrilla warfare. It's exactly what, for instance, like Dorne would do outside of, well, when the dragons came, they would kind of just go into their caves, they would disappear, but they also fought this kind of wars as well, ambushing their enemies, taking only battles that they can win. Shagga placed a hand on Tyrion's head and said he had already learned such war tactics from Dolf, son of Holger, before growing a beard, as they were the way of the mountains of the moon. This is something Tyrion is doing right. Another brilliant plan is use what you have to their strength. So, for instance, you could make the argument, well, Tyrion should keep all these mountain men in the castle because they're more loyal to you. It's more men. You're going to need them to defend the castle. But in reality, these men are not disciplined. They wouldn't really stay in formation, or even maybe in the heat of battle, listen to all these commands that you're giving them. So send them into an element that they're used to. Being able to ambush, for instance, the Lords of the Eyrie and all that kind of stuff. Send them into an element where they can be extremely useful. And we know, especially later on when we get to Garland Tyrell, when Tyrion interacts with him later in the next book, we see that Garland even notes if it wasn't for the Mountain Men, it would not have been the same battle. And so this is a key part of just putting those seeds together for the upcoming Battle of the Blackwater. Tyrion reminded him the King's Wood was not the mountains of the moon, and the foes were not milk snakes or painted dogs. He urged Shagga to heed the guides who knew the King's Wood as well as Shagga knew his mountains. And that's another key point. Even though you're using the Mountain Clansmen to their best abilities, making them go into guerrilla warfare, this is a territory and a land that they don't necessarily know the best. So you do want to make sure they're not overly confident. Yes, they've been given new weapons and all that kind of stuff, but to still play this little war safely. and to their best abilities. And Tyrion is smart to also give him men that know these areas. Shagga promised he would listen to Tyrion's pets as we get into page 534. Tyrion led his Garren onto the ferry and watched Shagga fade in the mist, feeling uneasy without his clansmen. He still had bronze hirelings, about 800 men, but new sellswords were fickle. Tyrion is right to feel almost naked, because all these other men are being bought by coin. Now, yes, the mountain clansmen were also kind of bought, right? Giving them more armor, weapons, all that kind of stuff that they were promised. But at the same time, Tyrion knew that he could A, control them to a degree, and he also knew that they were loyal to him for the moment. The sellswords could flip on him on a dime if somebody started paying them more, or they valued their lives more and believed that Stannis was going to win. All of them could easily flip on Tyrion. That's something that he realizes. Tyrion had promised Bronn and a dozen of his best men lands and knighthoods to secure their loyalty, but the sellswords had enjoyed his wine and laughed. But Bronn warned him they would kill for a knighthood, not die for it. And remember, people love gold. They love the pleasantries of getting all these things. But it comes to life or death, it's a whole different conversation. They're not willing to die for gold. At least most of these men are not. And so that's something you really deal with here, because if you're Tyrion, the other part of this that he's really going to deal with throughout this first 3 books arc for himself is people don't necessarily like him for him, like his personality, any of that stuff. They like him because they're being paid, and so that's kind of exemplified in these men that are actually serving him and Bronn. Tyrion did not deceive himself otherwise, but the city watch of 6,000 men was also unreliable. Bywater warned that while few were outright traitors, many were green recruits who might break if the battle turned. We know that these men are not the most seasoned. Only about 2,000 of them had remained from Robert's time, but the watchmen were not true soldiers, as Tywin often said. So there's a number of things that go into this. Janos Slynt was also their commander. Terrible commander. These men are not the ones you want to bank saving your life or defending this city. They're not hardened, trained veterans. You know, they're not Robb Stark's army at this point who've been through a number of battles. They're not the Westermen who are said to be trained really well, or the Eyrie and the Knights of the Vale. It's not like that. These are men that, for the most part, are collecting a paycheck. You know, this is a path of gaining food and security for you or your family. And even Tyrion notes, like, a lot of people are joining just because there's no food to be gotten in the city. So if you become part of the Gold Cloaks, well, to have an army, you have to feed them. And so they're going to get more priority than just being some random peasant. And that's the issue you run into, is if war was to break out, many of these men have never experienced any type of combat. They're not trained by like a master of arms. They're very raw, and you don't know how they're going to perform in battle. Tyrion continues commenting that he only had 300 knights, squires, and men-at-arms. He thought of Tywin saying, 1 man on a wall was worth 10 beneath it. And it's a very wise saying. It's something we hear with Ned as well, is just the idea that if you're somebody that is maybe not the best archer, you're not the best soldier, you've never been in battle, you on top of a wall, you know, with a gate blocking men of getting to you, you have a clear advantage, right? Think about how many arrows or men you can kill by the time they're able to maybe breach the gate or put ladders up. If you have great disciplined men, it's why sieges are so difficult to do. For instance, it's the reason Stannis had to kill Courtney Penrose in the way he did, because a siege or even rushing the castle would have lost them a lot of men, even if there wasn't that many men garrisoned at Storm's End. Bronn and his escort await him at the quay among beggars, whores, and fishwives selling fish. With no other food entering the city, fish prices were 10 times higher than before the war. Those with coin flocked to buy fish, and the poor tried to steal or stood hungry. It really reminds me a lot of Arya's last chapter in A Game of Thrones, where you see her struggling with getting any type of food, having to resort to stealing. Here it's so much worse. Now it's everybody in the city. It's not just the desperate, the poor. It's everybody. Even the upper class are starting to feel the effects of everything going on. And so when you have the only way that you're seeing food come into the city, and that being through fishing, that's going to be to the point where if you're somebody that you're a fisher, you've cornered the market. People will starve without your product, and so you can drive up the price, and people will pay it. That's just the way that we're in right now. If you even want to think about any type of economic issue, whether it's the United States, whether it's Russia, whether it's whatever, any type of economic decline, This has always been the case, right? Food, a lot of the times, even people will try to gather up all the food, try to hoard it, and then sell it for much higher prices and get rich. Same idea here in A Song of Ice and Fire. Gold cloaks cleared Tyrion's way with spear shafts as he ignored the curses of the crowd. Many are going to blame Tyrion, and that's something we really found out in his last chapter. And he's trying to have to ignore that. As we get into page 535, a rotten fish was hurled from the crowd, very similar to when we saw the riot and something being hurled, or dung being hurled at Joffrey, landing at Tyrion's feet and breaking apart. Children with swollen bellies scrambled to fight over the scraps of the fish, showing the desperation of the city. Tyrion mounted his horse and looked along the riverfront, where carpenters worked on hoardings at the mudgate. That progress pleased him, but he disliked the ramshackle shacks, stalls, and brothels clinging to the walls behind the quays. They would make it easy for Stannis to swarm the walls. And remember, the wall is what gives Tyrion a clear advantage. If it's where you have these buildings that are very makeshift, but they're allowing men to climb on top of them, and maybe you're only a couple feet from the top of the wall, that's huge. You don't have to rely on ladders, really. You just have to rely on maybe somebody just helps, push you up, more or less. That's huge. And so Tyrion knows this is going to be a massive issue. And the next thing he's going to order is going to make him very disliked once again by the people, because already the city is starving. And now you're going to take away their really only source of food. You're going to take it away from the river, more or less. He ordered Bronn to assemble 100 men and burn everything between the river and the walls. Bronn warned that the owners would resist, but Tyrion insisted, allowing people time to remove their property. He commanded that civilians not be killed and forbade sexual assault. Bronn replied that his sellswords were no septons and even mocked the idea of keeping them sober. It's a kind of a hard thing Tyrion has to do. He's uprooting people's livelihoods. But I'll say this, you've got to look at the bigger picture. Tyrion's trying to protect the city. He's even trying to at least be courteous to these people, giving them time to move their stuff. But unfortunately, this is war, and some things just have to be done, and Tyrion knows that. Tyrion reflected that even strong fortresses had fallen, as we get a little bit of an update on some of the castles that have fallen recently that we've seen. Storm's End, Harrenhal, and now Winterfell. He thought of Winterfell, remembering its strength and safety, and recalled the shock of hearing of its fall. And this has got to be a huge shock to pretty much everybody but Theon. Like, even to Balon, that was never the plan, but if you're hearing this basically across the world, you're going, Winterfell, this is one of the strongest, oldest castles in Westeros, and it's fallen. And how is that going to make Robb Stark react? And Tyrion's going to think about how that's going to play out in the war, and he's kind of completely correct, but it shifts the entire dynamics of the War of the Five Kings. Up to right now, Robb has had a flawless campaign. No real mistakes have been made until the taking of Winterfell. That's going to change what Robb has to do in the war. To Tyrion, it felt like the gods had given the Starks Harrenhal, but taken Winterfell in return. An empty and bitter exchange. And it's a horrible exchange if you're the Stark faction. Harrenhal, it's a great place, right? Because it gives you this position where you can react to any different thing because it's so centralized, and it also can house a ton of men. But Winterfell is the heart of the North. It is the capital of your family. If you're the Starks, if you lose it, it shows weakness. It shows that people can strike at you and nothing can happen in return. So it's a huge loss for the Starks. As we get into page 536, Tyrion reflected that Robb Stark would be forced north to defend Winterfell, giving House Lannister a reprieve. And that's the big part for House Lannister is the Lannisters, and Tywin's going to know this as well, is that Robb at this point now has to turn north. He can't let the whole north be occupied by the Greyjoys while he campaigns in the west. And so that opens the door. Like, how is Robb going to get back north? And when you see all the mistakes that he's going to make, he's going to get rid of the Freys because of his broken marriage alliance. He's going to get rid of the Karstarks because of killing Lord Karstark. And Catelyn releasing Jaime. You get to the point where Robb, this already had made his campaign very desperate because he now had to retake the North against pretty bad odds. It just allows for more bad things to happen. For instance, like Duskendale, as well, as we'll see within the next chapter with Arya. He recalled Theon Greyjoy only vaguely, finding it hard to imagine him as Lord of Winterfell, since it would always belong to a Stark in his mind. And oh, he's so correct, because Theon can't hold Winterfell necessarily. And also, you think about Winterfell's reputation, you think about the North as this cruel, hard, northern, harsh winter area. And here you have Theon, the always smiling young youth that doesn't take anything seriously, now as the Lord of Winterfell. He remembered Winterfell's godswood, its sentinels, oaks, hawthorn, ash, soldier pines, and the pale heart tree. He thought the Greyjoys might take the castle, but never truly claim the godswood. And that is the case. They might take it, for now, but it will never really be theirs. Tyrion reminded himself that Winterfell was nothing to him and urged himself to focus on King's Landing's defense. He might think interesting thoughts about world politics and all the things going on, but as of right now, his main focus is beating Stannis Baratheon and, well, living. At the Mudgate, he inspected 3 trebuchets the gold cloaks had nicknamed the 3 whores, meant to hurl stones at Stannis. He rode back to the Red Keep, encountering a dozen angry traitor captains, protesting the seizure of their ships. Tyrion apologized sincerely and promised compensation after the war, but one Braavosi pressed with what would happen if they lost. Tyrion replied they could seek repayment from Stannis. It's another kind of issue of war. It's like, this is not a good action that Tyrion's doing. Taking people's ships and using them for the war effort, like, that's not good. You're taking somebody's livelihood. It goes back to the fish markets really going on as well. Tyrion is making a lot of enemies in terms of just the common people and public opinion, but these are necessary things that have to happen. They need the ships. They need anything they can get to try and beat Stannis. After dismissing them, Tyrion hurried to the Sept for the installation of 2 new Kingsguard knights. He arrived late, slipping into the back where he couldn't see past the crowd, but realized he'd be well positioned to leave first once the vows ended. As we get into page 537, we note that 2 new Kingsguard are needed. One, because, well, Sir Preston died during the riots, and also, as we'll learn here, Sir Boros Blunt did not do a good job following his vows and allowed for Tommen to be captured by Tyrion's own men. Tyrion had approved of Cersei's choice of Sir Balon Swan for the Kingsguard, seeing him as valiant, skilled, and well-born. The Swans had hedged their bets in the war by dividing their loyalties, which Tyrion thought wise. I agree. Think about all these different houses that are going for one side and how it could really backfire. You think about, for instance, like the Blackfire Targaryen conflict. If you were backing the Blackfires, you stood to lose a ton. Well, if you just kind of put your eggs in both baskets, you can't really get hurt because, well, you were supporting both sides. Is it not really the most honorable thing? No, but it's also a great way of preserving your livelihood, not losing like your whole family, your castle, all this stuff if you bet wrong. It's not a bad idea. But Tyrion was far less impressed with Sir Osmond Kettleblack, Cersei's second pick. Though strong and fearsome looking, he was low-born and entirely dependent on her. Tyrion knew Osmond was secretly selling her secrets to Bronn, but let it stand since it gave him another spy near Joffrey. Sir Osmond is definitely not up to the code of the Kingsguard. Anybody with eyes can see that. Cersei thinks this is just a play of getting someone that's loyal to her in the Kingsguard. Terrible choice. Barristan Selmy would be rolling in his grave. Well, he's still alive, so he's not rolling in his grave, but he would hate this of what's going on. Also, we do know that the Kettleblacks are not spies for Bronn, they're really spies for Littlefinger, so this plays right into his hand more than anything. Tyrion reflected that even if Osmond proved a coward, he was no worse than Sir Boros Blunt, who had surrendered Tommen during Bywater's ambush. Cersei had Joffrey strip Boros of his cloak for treason and cowardice, and agreed. As a Kingsguard, you are supposed to give your life for your king and their family. You just giving up Tommen is terrible. Could you imagine somebody like Barristan Selmy doing that? It just would never happen. And so I think that was a good move. He did not need to be on the Kingsguard, but replacing him with Osmond Kettleblack is just like, okay, he's a better swords fighter. That's about it. But as the ceremony continued, there was praying, vows, and anointed dragging on through the morning, making Tyrion restless. His legs ached as he stood among the crowd. He noticed Lady Tonda in attendance, but not her daughter Lollys. He had half hoped to glimpse Shae instead, though Varys assured him she was doing well in her new role. Tyrion remembered Shae's reaction to Varys' plan to hide her as a lady's maid rather than a pot girl. She had been eager to take along her silver flower belt and gold collar with black diamonds, though she promised not to wear them if Tyrion disapproved. Shae is a lot happier with the situation given that she's not doing grunt work, and she's also going to be able to keep certain things. She's still not understanding the idea that she can't go parading around with all these jewels and great dresses, because then at what point do people go, why are you richer than the lady you're serving? And then the questions will be like, Shay, where did she come from? And it all starts to go back, and then it'll be figured out. So Shay hasn't picked up on that. And so that's why I think it's interesting, because Shay, on one hand, is a character that can be intelligent in the book, but she's also can be very innocent and childlike, like in terms of how she goes about arguing with what she can take and wear and stuff like that. As we get into page 538. Tyrion had to limit Shay's demand for luxury. He told her Lady Tanda might grow suspicious if her maid wore more jewelry than her daughter, so he commanded Shay to bring only 2 or 3 simple dresses and leave her finer things in his chambers. It wasn't what she wanted, but it kept her safe, and that is really the whole point of it. Keep her identity secret and keep her safe. The Kingsguard ceremony ended with Joffrey marching between Sir Balon and Sir Osmond in their new white cloaks, while Tyrion stayed behind to speak with the new High Septon. And this is where we're going to get the next phase of kind of building up the conflict between Stannis and the Lannisters, is use the faith against Stannis. Something I really made a point of early on in this reread is the faith. Stannis openly going against the faith, and he's going with R'hllor. That's going to isolate a lot of people against him, and we kind of finally start to see some of the fruits of that stuff that was planted early on. I mean, it is there, right, with why people don't follow Stannis and go for someone like Renly and stuff like that, but it really starts to bear fruit here when you see Tyrion use it against Stannis. Get the public opinion maybe much more against him as well, albeit it's not great for Tyrion either. But what's also brilliant about the placing of the High Septon is that Tyrion had hand-picked him, and so the High Septon knew, don't disobey Tyrion. This is why you got the job. He bluntly instructed him to warn the faithful that Stannis planned to burn the Great Sept, as he had already burned Storm's End's God's Wood. Anyone aiding Stannis, Tyrion insisted, betrayed both gods and king. The High Septon agreed to spread the word and pray for both Joffrey and Tyrion. And the one thing the High Septon questions is this actually the case? And it doesn't really matter. The idea that Tyrion is painting into the ideas of the people are going to be, Stannis is coming to take all of your beliefs. If you believe in the Seven, if you're any of that, you should oppose Stannis. He's bringing the devil. He's bringing R'hllor. He's coming to burn down everything you hold near and dear. That's the point. And that would be very effective. I mean, think about, as you go further back in history, religion had a much bigger and powerful role in people's lives and going to war and conflicts. It's the same in Westeros. Think about the High Sparrow and the Sparrows, the Faith Militant in Book 4. Think about the whole issue the faith had and the power that they had before Maegor and the Targaryen dynasty kind of put them down a bit. That's the whole point Tyrion's trying to do. He's trying to weaponize religion. Back in his Solar, Tyrion received letters, one from Doran Martell confirming the fall of Storm's End, and another, much more interesting, from Balon Greyjoy, who now styled himself King of the Isles and the North. Balon invited Joffrey to send an envoy to Pike to discuss borders and a possible alliance. Now, this is what's so crazy, is you just think about how stupid Balon is. So Balon wants to more or less make an alliance with the Lannisters, which is crazy. And you can understand why he's trying to do it, because the Lannisters pose the biggest threat to Balon, given their proximity to Balon. Like, the Westerlands are right next to the Iron Islands. And so when you think about that for a second, you're like, okay, so you're willing to make an alliance with the Lannisters, but not with Robb. Like, Robb came to you offering an alliance. Now, the problem here is that Robb was like, we're going to help you get a crown or whatnot. It's so stupid. It just tells you how much of an idiot Balon is. Like, the Lannisters right now are on the losing side of the war, and you're asking for their help. How are they going to help you? Like, they can't. And Tyrion's going to play with that. Like, Balon's ships would be a great use to the Lannisters right now, but they're all the way across the world. They're of no help. And even if you were to get their ships, the Ironborn are right now preoccupied in taking the North. They can barely even hold it. They have men at Moat Cailin, Deepwood Motte, and they have a couple men with Theon at Winterfell. That's it. And they're saying they control the North. The Greyjoys, not the best alliance to make here, and Tyrion kind of understands that as well. Tyrion considers it for a little while, but he disliked the idea of conceding half the realm, and he debated whether to pass the matter to Cersei or the council. Very much Tyrion has a grip on the information and who it's getting to and when it's being allowed to go to the council or whatnot, and it just doesn't make any sense. Give away half the realm Tywin would never go for it, and so Tyrion obviously is going to discount it. So finally, after all this, after making Halland the pyromancer wait, he brought him in, who Halland gives him the latest wildfire tallies, which Tyrion was astonished at the reported number, almost 13,000 jars, way over the amount that was predicted by Halland to be able to give to Tyrion. There seems to be something going on here, and Tyrion accuses Halland of trickery. He refused to pay for what he suspected might be empty vessels, or worse. This is exactly how I would react if I was Tyrion. Here is the pyromancers telling you that they're going to get to this amount, and then all of a sudden they get way past that. It seems really weird. Are they just trying to get a bigger pay cut because they made more? What's going on here? And that's what will be going through my mind as we get into page 539. Tyrion reacts skeptically when Halland insists the wildfire tallies are accurate. The pyromancer explains that another hidden cache of jars was discovered under the dragon pit after a drunken man mistook one for wine. And this is great because remember, in the House of the Undying chapter, we get a little tiny vision of Aerys saying to burn them all. Now, as a reader, if this was your first time reading the series, you might not know that that was Aerys. You might think that maybe it was somebody else. It's not explicit that it was Aerys. There's no like naming going on there. But as you're reading the book and you start to figure out more about Aerys and Robert's Rebellion, this is great foreshadowing into what we're going to see with Jaime really in the next book. And it's a nice little nod there from George that he places this wildfire cache was found right after we get kind of the reveal of the Aerys stuff that was going on right before his death. Tyrion then recalls the story of Aerion Brightflame, who had also once drank wildfire, but since no dragons had risen, it clearly hadn't worked then either. He pressed Halland about the new numbers, noting they are several thousand jars ahead of the last estimate. The wildfire that they found doesn't really add up to the numbers here. It might help, but there's still much more that's already been made that they hadn't predicted. Halland insists that he and the alchemists have been working tirelessly. He exclaims that their increased output comes from practice and rediscovered spells, ancient delicate incantations that ensure the wildfire is properly made. He grows uneasy under Tyrion's questions, but admits the spells now seem to work better than before, as nervously he wonders aloud if dragons might have returned. This is the thing. Halland has no real reason as to why they're working faster. Yes, he would love to say it's because of their skill, and he does admit that, like, because they're working so hard, they're doing it over and over and over again, they're getting better at it, but that doesn't explain everything. And it does seem that magic is used in making wildfire, and all of a sudden that's become more and more easy for them to do. It's very interesting that once again, George places the House of the Undying right before this chapter. So it's fresh in your mind that, oh yeah, these spells are working because the dragons are back. That's what Quaithe told to Daenerys. It's really nice touch. This chapter is very well placed in this book. He recalls something Wisdom Politur had once told him as an acolyte, that magic had begun to fade from the world the day the last dragon died, explaining why so many spells had seemed ineffective. It kind of circles back to the point that when the dragons had been in their full power, magic had been much more prominent. But since then, that magic has died down, showing that obvious connection that Daenerys has with magic. As we get into page 540, Tyrion warns Halland that if any of the wildfire jars turn out to be false, he will be executed, as Halland flees quickly, nearly colliding with Lord Jacqueline Bywater. And this is no laughing matter. This is going to seem like for Tyrion that Halland is playing him for a fool, all this kind of stuff, because you just can't accept, wait, dragons? Dragons haven't been seen for years at this point. There's no indication that Daenerys has survived with the dragons or any of that stuff. At this point, Halland seems kind of like a crazy person, and this is holding the fate of the city on his shoulders. If this wildfire doesn't work, Tyrion is screwed. Bywater brings news of Prince Tommen, who's healthy, has adopted a fawn, and sometimes writes unfinished letters to Myrcella. He does not miss Joffrey. That is very clear. Also, just to catch you guys up, remember, Tyrion had sent Bywater to get Tommen under their protection, all that kind of stuff, so that really, if Stannis took the city, that Tommen would be out of the way and the heir would be separate from Joffrey. Tyrion asks about contingency plans for Tommen if King's Landing falls, but Bywater reminds him that Tyrion ordered secrecy even from himself. And that's really important. If Tyrion was to be captured, let's say he was tortured, all that kind of stuff, threatened with execution, even Tyrion wouldn't be able to tell Stannis where Tommen is. But after this, Varys then soon arrives, lamenting men's faithlessness as he brings more people that are unfaithful to the crown. And this is something I really want to point out. Think about if you are a king, if you're the Mad King Aerys, for instance. I really pointed a lot to this in my analysis of that character on my main channel. You're coming daily to the king, you as the king, and you're being told these people are disloyal, they're planning treason, all this kind of stuff. It would make you so untrustworthy, seeing enemies everywhere, even where they're not. But this is what Varys brings news of more traitors. Tyrion asks who the traitors are this time, and Varys gives him a scroll listing conspirators calling themselves the Antler Men, merchants and craftsmen who believe Stannis will win. The Antler Men had armed hundreds of followers and planned to seize the Old Gate during the battle to admit Stannis' forces. Among the name is Salorian, the Master Armorer, disappointing Tyrion since he had hoped for a demon-horned helm from him. Tyrion issues the order for Salorion's arrest. Salorian had been one of the men that Tyrion had asked about doing the chain earlier on in the book, and so that's coming first full circle. It's just showing how people are growing desperate. They believe the Lannisters are going to lose based on their losses going on in the Riverlands in the West, and Stannis' growing army and him coming for King's Landing. Just showing more of that betrayal, all that kind of stuff. So this chapter ends on a note which is a complete build-up chapter to the Battle of the Blackwater, which we're not very far away from. We're going to see some more Tyrion build-up chapters, even a little bit with Sansa before we get there, but this is a big one. Like, this is the one that's really built on building up what is to come with the battle. The next couple ones are going to be building more of the tension between our characters with the looming threat of Stannis, but this is the big one. Like, this is the big one in terms of building all the pieces together. The wildfire, how much does Tyrion have? I used this chapter a ton. When I did my Battle of the Blackwater analysis, I used this chapter heavily for a lot of the buildup. You've got stuff like the status of the men, how many does Tyrion have, how is he using them, their loyalties, all that kind of stuff. You see that there is unrest in the city with treasons going on, building all into the Battle of the Blackwater. So we're almost there. We're really getting towards the end of the book. I say it, I feel like every single video now at the end of these, but I really enjoy, I think really once you get to the midpoint of A Clash of Kings and then the end is just fantastic. There's really no bad chapters towards the back end outside of maybe Dany 5. We'll get there when we get there. But thank you guys all for watching. I hope you guys all enjoyed, and I'll see you guys all in the next one. Bye, guys.